Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and tonight we are talking about the Season 10 road trip. Where did the boys travel in Season 10? What cities and towns did they claim to be in, even though we know it was all Vancouver? But where did they say they were going, and why might the writers have picked those places? But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Anna.
I'm Anna Kensing, and I write queer romance along the spectrum, although mostly MM. And I started watching Supernatural sort of early in the first season. Took a brief break from it for a little while, and then got back in and never left.
Very good, Elektra and Oscar.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and an editor. I've been watching Supernatural since that very first episode aired, and Oscar works as my assistant editor and helps keep me from making too many mistakes and keeps me concentrating.
There we go. And I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I came late to the party, fell in love with the show halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in time for the start of season 12. And, you know, as they say, the rest is history. So tonight we're looking at season 10. You know, this was Demon Dean's season. This was the Mark of Cain. There was a lot going on, but the boys still found time with all of that to travel all over the country. So what locations jumped out to you when you first took a look at that season 10 roster? Anna?
Well, so we spent a fair bit of time in the bunker, right? Which is its own location and its own sort of phenomenon and its own continual panel, surely. So, you know, we spent a lot of time. We also spent a lot of time in Needham Asylum, which is a decommissioned mental hospital in Fall River, Massachusetts, and is where Crowley holds court in 8 episodes over season 10. So it's like this creepy, you know, like old mental hospital building that has various places where Crowley can have a throne room and dungeons, and, you know, he can do all kinds of nefarious plotting after his bromance with Demon Dean ends, sadly and disappointingly for Crowley mostly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is such a thing as an abandoned, non-creepy mental institution, but you're right, right up there.
Because we've had mental hospitals before, abandoned mental hospitals before in the show, right? In previous seasons. It's a location that lends itself really well to a site for a Supernatural episode. So this is definitely not the first season that we've had an abandoned mental institution be a major location. But I think this might be the season that we spend the most time in one particular one.
Usually it's a one-off monster of the week kind of thing. So,
right, like in season 1 or 2, you know, there's one that
season 1 when. Yeah. And then the one with the plague doctor masks, and they keep going back to these, you know. You think they learned.
Yeah. The boys would learn.
They're always creepy.
Mm-hmm.
They are always creepy. Yeah, you'd think the boys would learn, but it turns out that the Supernatural writers and location manager figure, why mess with a good thing?
Well, they're good places to go.
Mm-hmm. Elektra, what jumped out at you?
Well, starting off with, they went to Flint. Flint, Michigan is first off a well-known place because, you know, there's lead in the water there, and that's been a continuous problem. And I wish they would have highlighted that more as long as they were claiming to be there. I mean, there's been a whole documentary produced about the water crisis in Flint, and all they did was stage a musical there.
Yeah.
But, you know, at least we were there. and we spent an episode there, not there. Just be careful if you drink the water.
Yeah, just
That's
don't.
true. Just don't drink the water there.
When I looked up Flint, there's a relocated cemetery that didn't bother moving all the bodies. So that's one of the haunted places in Flint, because people took exception to not being moved. There's a haunted theater. No idea whether or not that's the theater they staged the musical in. Probably not, because that was a school theater, but there is a haunted one, as well as two haunted hotels and a haunted office building. So there are enough ghosts to go around in Flint.
I mean, Flint is there's some bleak aspects to Flint. So hauntings are, I think, par for the course in some segments of Flint. I spent some parts of my childhood in Detroit some decades ago, and yeah, there's some parts of Flint that lend itself to hauntings. But this is fan fiction, right? This is the 200th episode, and so in this episode, there are multiple references to the 200th episode. The boys are staying at the Route 200 Motor Inn, or the Route 200 Motel, right? They're staying in room 200. There's a $2 pancake breakfast advertised at the school. So there's sort of, like some little tiny things that remind us of and help us celebrate the fact that this is, a milestone for the show.
Yeah. And it was a great episode. Really, I think that's one of everybody's favorite episodes.
One of my favorite ones.
It is. And just that moment when Sam and Dean both hear this song they've heard so many times in their life and apply it to their own lives, that moment when you can see they get it. That is just such an amazing moment in that episode.
So I went to a Supernatural fan convention in Vancouver a few years ago, and one of the things that I did was a location tour. That was part of the part of the convention. I think it was like a day or two before, and we went to the auditorium where this episode was filmed, which was really cool. And so it's this
and
auditorium,
not in Flint.
Not in Flint, Michigan, no. In the suburbs of Vancouver. And I myself did like the musical in high school, and so it felt very like I walked in the auditorium of this high school, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember being in this. And so then all of the people who were there for the location tour at the convention, we all stood up on the stage, and then we sang the song, all of us together, and it was just like, it was pretty awesome.
At some of the conventions, Rob Benedict and Richard Speight Jr. do a bus tour where they take people from the convention on a tour of the city led by them. Now, they know absolutely nothing about the city. They haven't looked anything up. They're making everything up as they go. But you can be in a bus with them for an hour as they make things up about your town. And I know when I didn't go on the tour when they did it here in Charlotte, but their bus broke down, I guess.
Oh, no.
They had to entertain a bus full of people longer than they expected. So yeah, I can't imagine what they would have made up, but there you go.
Oh, I bet they're good at it.
Oh, I'm sure everybody still had a bonus great time. Yeah. Including them. Yeah. One of the things that caught my attention in, one of the first locations that they visit in the season is Beulah, North Dakota. And there's a town really near Beulah called Tagus. And there is theoretically a stairway to hell located under the Tagus Lutheran Church. Lutherans, who knew? I mean, expected of them.
I'm married to one. I had no idea.
Wow.
Yeah, they're usually so proper, but yes, a stairway to hell underneath the Tagus Lutheran Church. So close enough to Beulah that maybe it counts.
Maybe
so
we'll
also
have to check that out.
Yeah, definitely.
Like
So in that first episode, right, when they're in Beulah, North Dakota, they're hanging out at the Black Spur Bar, right? Which, according to the episode, is located at 156 Knife River Road in Beulah, North Dakota. So apparently there is a 156 Knife River Drive in Stanley, North Dakota. And it's not that far from the Stanley Amtrak station, but it seems to be a residential area. So I don't know about like the kind of bar that Crowley and Dean went to, being on this, what seems to be kind of a residential cul-de-sac kind of place. And then there's also a 156 West Knife River Road in Two Harbors, Minnesota, which is northwest of Duluth and is on Lake Superior. So I don't think that that's what they were modeling it on. I think they were probably modeling it on the Stanley, North Dakota location. But yeah, so there's a couple of places in this country called Knife River Road or Knife River Drive.
Maybe they made it up.
Maybe they made it up.
Writers do that sometimes,
Right?
I mean, those show writers, how dare they? We thought this was a documentary.
Don't tell anyone.
So what else?
You're
What
still
other
working
locations?
on gathering that stuff together.
Mhm.
Don't tell anyone. Oh.
One of the other ones that jumped out at me was Durham, Washington. Durham, Washington is a ghost town. It's a former coal town. It closed down in 1944. There's nothing but foundations left. And yet that ended up being where they said they were going. And it sure didn't look like it in the show, because I've seen pictures of Durham, Washington, and it truly is ruins. So I thought that was interesting that they picked a town that's real, but non-existent anymore to cite as a location.
Well, Charlie comes back from Oz, and we discover that she's from the incredibly ordinary place of Topeka.
Mm-hmm.
And we go there to keep her from, inciting mayhem as best we can.
But Topeka has a potentially demon haunted Church of the Damned that has since burnt down due to arson. It has a legend of a guy they call Hamburger Man, who has a disfigured face and kidnaps people and chops them up. There is a mansion, the Slate House, the State House, sorry, I can't read my own writing. The governor's mansion is said to be very haunted thanks to accidental deaths and suicide. And apparently Stull Cemetery shows up listed under Topeka. So lots of reasons for Winchesters in Topeka.
I mean, you couldn't have Charlie being from any place other than Kansas if you're going to have her connected with the Oz episode and Dorothy and all that kind of stuff, right? Because Dorothy came from Kansas, and the episode is titled "There's No Place Like Home," and it's sort of like all wrapped up in the whole Oz story. And so if you're going to have Charlie and Dorothy being sort of in matching episodes, then I think you just got to make it so that Charlie is originally from someplace in Kansas, and we've already got Lebanon because of the bunker, and we've already got Lawrence because that's where the boys grew up.
Yeah.
So might as well throw Topeka in.
Kansas is very important in this whole story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Eric Kripke grew up in the sort of like industrial, blue collar Midwest, these kinds of towns where these boys grew up and created a show that was about this kind of like blue collar dudes that hadn't really been on TV before. Like I spent a few years living in Detroit, and I grew up too with the same guys that Sam and Dean were, like ones who worked at auto plants or worked as mechanics in garages. The fathers of, several of the boys in my classroom were all mechanics, or they work at Ford plants or GM or, places like that. And so like these guys are super familiar to me. And so like that was Eric Kripke's like childhood and mine too. And so, like I totally get that vibe that he created in the show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the Rust Belt too, and I am constantly surprised at how well it recreates the kind of homes and towns that I grew up in. Not to mention that they're doing this in Vancouver, but just there are details sometimes in the houses, in the architecture, in the knickknacks And I'm going, okay, somebody here, somebody in the writer's room, somebody in the prop room, somebody else grew up with this, because you're getting the little things right.
Exactly.
And you know, you wouldn't notice it if you weren't from there and weren't familiar. It would just, you know, be background. But when you are, I think that's part of the show's genius, is that it sweated the details on those kind of things.
Absolutely.
You can do anything in Vancouver.
You can. It's crazy.
They can do, they can do, you know, like Afghanistan in Vancouver, and it works.
Or
You just
New
have
York
to have
City
really
in
good
Vancouver.
people.
I mean, not really New York City, but like a big city that is, you know, sort of like densely populated. You know, you can do anything in
Well, you
Vancouver.
have to
Or
go
you
down
could
to
do,
the city, but yeah.
or you could do like a rural stretch of nothingness that, you know, just by going,
They have
you
all
know,
that
35
stuff.
minutes out of town.
Well, and then you go out to the ocean and you can do like whale watching. It's great.
Yep.
It's a
Well,
great
there are-
area for this stuff.
Alana King did a number of video podcasts for many years at conventions, where she and her friends would go driving around and finding the locations that were used in the show. And they're really fun to watch, because, you know, sometimes there's a building that's still there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can see, okay, they just put up different signs here, they shot it, you know, from a different angle. Other times, you know, it was constructed from the ground up. But it's kind of fun to see the actual locations, you know, like the fence where Dean tells Sam that, you know, John gave him the secret, and it's really overgrown. And I had a friend who found it in the, you know, at night in the rain, got caught by the cops, tried to explain why they're at this fence in the middle of nowhere. And the cop was like, oh, you're a Supernatural fan. Just go home. So I think they're kind of used to it. But if that is a fun set of videos on YouTube to watch if you are just curious about what the real places actually looked like. And sometimes they used them more than once. You know, well, here's the house that was used in season 1, but it was also used in season 8. Just they shot it from a different angle. So
exactly. Yeah. And they go back to different places, right? So
right.
In season 10, they go back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which they've been to a couple different times in the season. And so in the 3rd episode, in Soul Survivor, we are shown that Rowena we don't know that it's Rowena yet, but there's a very attractive woman who is sitting in a hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a fancy looking hotel. And she's in front of a fireplace, and she's drinking some wine, and she's listening to classical music, and she's just, you know, enjoying her lovely evening in this luxurious hotel, while 2 hotel employees are nailed to the ceiling. And so my wife is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I've been there multiple times. So I'm thinking that this is probably the Ambassador Hotel, which I've stayed at a couple times. I'm not entirely sure that there are rooms with fireplaces in them, but it is like it's been bought by a chain, I think Marriott, but it was like a, you know, independently owned hotel for a period of time. And it is like Tulsa's like one of Tulsa's like nicer places. And so I think that it is a place that Rowena would definitely be interested in staying in, or would find acceptable to stay in.
Well, apparently Tulsa has a haunted theater. It has a speakeasy called the Cave House.
I've been there.
And oh, okay. And there's a place called Kane's Ballroom, which was renowned for gang fights.
And like high school cotillions. Like
well, when you're a medium-sized town, you have to multitask.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
gang fights on Friday, cotillion on Saturday. As long
exactly.
as you play blood, it's all good.
I'm pretty sure that my wife went to a dance at Kane's Ballroom when she was in middle school. Pretty sure about that.
You know, the middle schoolers go back to bed fairly early, and then the gang fights are scheduled later.
Right.
Well, and the speakeasy like theoretically has like a hidden tunnel. Yeah. You know, like every good speakeasy, it's got a hidden tunnel to get away from, you know, revenuers. So, but I just thought that it being Kane's Ballroom, as in work, was kind of cool too.
It is kind of cool, yeah. Tulsa's actually a really interesting town. It's got a lot of Art Deco architecture, and it had has had sort of some boom times for oil money and things like that. Nice.
These would be great places to actually shoot if only they shot there.
Yeah, and it could use
So,
some money.
Elektra, any
If only they could get out of Canada. Well, we do go back to Hibbing.
Mhm.
That is the one with the convention.
Donna and Donut.
Where we finally get
Mhm.
Donna into the fold and she discovers vampires.
Mhm.
And takes it in stride.
Yeah.
Well, once they explain it to her,
Yeah.
because she saw the teeth and she was a little confused, and Jody sat her down and gave her the talk. And
I still wanted to see Kathleen from The Usual Suspects at that sheriff's convention, because that was also in Hibbing. And I'm just thinking, after she had the whole Dana Schultz thing, she should have been right in there with Donna and Jody.
well, this is also where we discover that Donna has a type,
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, she does.
which is apparently cops named Doug.
With porn
And that
stashes.
starts playing out.
Porn stashes, yes.
Her poor taste.
So, yes. And so apparently the writer picked Hibbing to set this episode in as a reference to Bob Dylan, who was raised in Hibbing. And so there's like Dylan references like throughout the whole episode. There's a use of a song, The Wait. There's a reference to the song Up Cripple Creek, because the vampire nest is located at 424 Cripple Creek Road. And so it's a whole thing about Bob Dylan and Hibbing, and
that just went
because
right.
of the writer. And Hibbing was
Getting
also
old,
the
Well, see, I
setting.
love that the
Hibbing was also the setting for the Benders in season 1, which is one of my favorite
Yeah.
episodes, because the monsters there are not monsters at all. They're people.
They're the worst monsters of all. They're us.
I love that the show can still surprise us with these Easter eggs, even all these years later, because the writers took such good care and honestly must have had a blast hiding these things in the show.
I really think so.
Well, they were allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other towns that they visit is Fayetteville, North Carolina. And the real Fayetteville has haunted mansions and a haunted tavern. It's got floating green lights near railroad tracks, which are said to be some poor guy who got run over by a train and is looking for his head. It's got a haunted creek and a haunted plantation and a haunted theater, as every good Southern town does. So, had they gone with real lore from Fayetteville, North Carolina, the Winchesters could have kept pretty busy on haunting things and maybe finding the poor guy's head.
Okay. How much unhaunting things did they do? Or did they just take care of the ghosts, I guess?
In that episode?
Yeah, I think, they only worried about the ghosts that bothered people. They didn't necessarily like unhaunt B&Bs if they weren't causing anybody any trouble.
Right.
If the ghosts weren't malevolent.
Right.
They wouldn't really be like, they wouldn't find the job if somebody hadn't died, right? Like they only find jobs because somebody got, horribly killed or dismembered or something, right? If it doesn't show up in News of the Weird, then Sam and Dean don't find the job.
Yeah. Well, and that's if nobody's complaining about it, if it's just the sort of ghost that pulls your blanket off in the middle of the night, people pay extra to stay in that room. So, I think there'd be an outcry if the Winchesters went around unhaunting, B&Bs that charge more if you get the ghost room.
I think they would do it, but then I think the proprietors would not appreciate it.
Nobody's happy when you do that.
Yeah. No. There's also in Spencer, Iowa, which is one of the locations, there is a place called Moose Pond. And the lore around that one reminds me a lot of the episode Dead in the Water, because it's supposedly haunted by the spirit of a little boy who drowned falling through the ice. And when the pond is iced over in the winter, you can theoretically hear screams and voices from below the ice, which I thought was pretty darn freaky, but it's Moose Pond. So, because they have a lot of mooses. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting legend and tied back to Dead in the Water.
Yes, that is a nice callback to Dead in the Water.
Elektra, what else have you found?
Well, there is the whole bit about their friends in Shreveport,
Yes.
the Stein family, and their little enclave in Shreveport. Shreveport's a lovely place. Aside from the Steins, it's a lovely place to visit down there. That's a nice part of Louisiana.
But Louisiana is just a little bit haunted.
Well, in general, it is. But when I was down there, I wasn't looking for haunted places. I was just touristing.
Well, now, according to the sites I was looking up, like everywhere in Louisiana and the Deep South, everything's haunted. There are haunted mansions, there's a haunted Civil War hospital, there's a haunted bridge with a floating green light. And of course, all those mansions and houses are dogged by some sort of legend of tragedy somewhere in the past. So,
well, everything down there is kind of sad.
Yeah.
I think I just went down there for a Mardi Gras parade.
That makes sense.
Which was less sad and more fun.
Unless you didn't catch any beads, and then that's that's a whole different kind of tragedy.
Well, and it was a little bit drunken, but fun mostly.
Yeah, I remember seeing the clip when Jensen got to be the float king with the crew, and he said his nails and his hands were bleeding by the end of the evening from digging into that batch of stuff and throwing it out. His hands were a mess by the end of the evening, which I thought was interesting. You never really think about that, but
it depends on what you're throwing out.
Yeah,
a whole lot. Different crews for different stuff. We have a whole pile of stuff that we brought back from all the different places, all the different parades we went to, and all the things we collected.
Yeah, I love the trees in New Orleans that they just leave festooned with beads. It kind of looks like some sort of offering to a pagan god.
It does. It really does.
So, speaking of which, New Canaan, Connecticut had one of the weirder real legends that I'm really kind of sad the boys didn't draw on. For many years, there was a wandering hobo that they called Leatherman, and he wore a patchwork outfit made of leather. And he didn't speak English. He spoke some kind of mangled French, but he would make the rounds of sympathetic houses that would give him food and sometimes give him pieces of leather to patch his outfit. Never said he hurt anybody, but he was there were actual pictures of him and he looked kind of scary. This whole head to toe patched leather outfit. And he lived in a cave in the woods. And then he would make his rounds to, beg food from these people. And he kind of had a calendar that he kept of who he visited when, so they sort of knew to have food for him. And that went on for many years. And then, somebody eventually found him dead in his cave. But I thought that just seems like such a Winchester sort of story.
It is a Winchester sort of story. It's interesting because New Canaan is is one of the towns that's on what's called the Gold Coast in Connecticut, which is like a section, like a series of towns on the east coast of Connecticut that are within commuting distance to New York City. And so they're the homes of people who have a lot of money, and many of them, they're weekend homes or summer homes, or homes that they live in for people who work in the city, and they either work remotely or they commute into New York City, but they are very, very, very wealthy people. And so it's sort of interesting that this like person managed to get tribute from these residents.
Well, this was back around World War II. So this would have been like in like the 30s, 40s, 50s. It was not modern.
But I think the Gold Coast has been the Gold Coast for like at least 50 years.
Maybe he was getting something from the help. Maybe he
Yeah.
was doing the rounds of the kitchens, and because
Maybe.
that's wealthy enough area that they all have maids and cooks.
Sure, yeah, that could be.
And those are the sort of people who will, I was patching somebody's coat or somebody's whatever, and I have stuff left over.
Or
Yes.
here's the leftovers from dinner. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
There was also
too busy living to come up with where we get extra stuff. But when you have people whose job it is to do that.
Yeah. The other one in Massachusetts, because the boys just ping-ponged all over the country in this city. In Worcester, Massachusetts, there is a cemetery that has gates that are supposed to look like a starburst, but they really look like a spider web, and they're called the Spider Gates. And that cemetery supposedly has the 8th gate to hell.
Why do I not know this? I used to go there on a regular basis. I had a friend.
I drive through Worcester on the reg because I go back and forth between New York City and Maine, and we drive through Worcester every single time.
Well,
now you have something to look for.
Lived in the Boston area, and I would go out to Worcester because I had friends there.
So now you've got to look for the Spider Gates and or the 8th gate to hell.
Yeah, now there's something to look for there.
Definitely, yeah.
There's also supposedly a very haunted Worcester State Hospital. I'm assuming that's some sort of asylum.
I believe that.
I just know
having driven through Worcester several times, I believe that.
Chinese place, and the comic shop where I met the turtle creators.
As one does.
As one does when one is in Worcester.
There's a really good weed shop in Worcester too, FYI.
I think I predated that by a couple of decades, perhaps.
What else?
So we're back in Tulsa at the end of the season in episode 20, Angel Heart, where Claire Novak is trying to track down her mother and figure out what happened to her after her father, Jimmy Novak, got possessed by Castiel and disappeared from their life. And so she ends up in Susie's bar in Tulsa and the Tulsa Memorial Hospital, and then the Curtis Motor Court, where she's been staying. And so apparently Susie's bar is named after S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders and Rumblefish, and was a huge Supernatural fan, and got invited on the set. And so they named Susie's bar after her, and then they named the Curtis Motor Court probably after the Curtis brothers from The Outsiders, and because The Outsiders is set in Tulsa, and that is S.E. Hinton's hometown. So another shout out to Tulsa in season 10.
Okay, that's cool. I just got.
She's been on set a couple times.
She's been in shots. She's
an extra in, I forget what episode it is, but she's an extra.
There's a diner shot, and she's like in the background she's one of the people in the booths just having breakfast talking to.
Yes, when Eve, the mother of all, is like talking to Sam and Dean and takes the form of Mary Winchester, and she's there, and I think S.E. Hinton gets killed by Eve or by one of her minions I think it's that episode that she's an extra in the shot, and maybe one or two other, but I think that's the one where she's there.
I can recite large portions of The Outsiders. Just
Oh,
Yeah.
I tweeted something about that at one point, and she actually commented on my tweet
Oh,
because
nice.
I read The Outsiders in middle school like everybody else, you know,
Yes.
Pony Boy Forever. And
Stay gold.
yeah.
Also, when I need to have a good cry, the movie, the Francis Ford Coppola movie.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Like sometimes you just need to have a good cry, and you're not exactly sure what's going to make it. Put The Outsiders on.
Yeah. Well, and that movie had like the whole Brat Pack from that
Yes.
period.
Yes.
It was one of those Brat Pack movies that had
well,
all
he
the,
was the one who created them.
yeah.
That was the first one that
Yeah.
made them stars. That made Ralph Macchio.
Ralph Macchio, C. Thomas Howell, Rob Lowe, one of the Estevez brothers, Patrick
Mm.
Swayze. Like it's
They're Emilio Estevez is the one in it.
right.
Mhm.
Emilio. Yeah.
There's that movie made a lot of them, started them off.
Mhm.
Because
So
that was the book is hugely popular.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Every generation.
Yeah, I think it's still getting a sign.
Diane Lane is
Yeah.
in it too, I think.
Diane Lane. Yeah, she's Cherry, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
I don't remember it at all.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, I remember that.
Like I said, I just got my anniversary edition slipcased. It's gorgeous. With all these interior illustrations.
Mm.
Um,
Well, and they slipped a lot of people in as extras in many of those diner scenes. There's one where Jensen's brother and sister-in-law are sitting further down the counter than he is. I think Lynn Zervanis might have gotten slipped in the background in like a crowd scene somewhere. They managed to get a lot of family and friends in when they just needed warm bodies to sit, at chairs.
Once you get 10 seasons in, you can do a lot of that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So, and in season 3 or in episode 3 of this season, Soul Survivor, there's a gas station where Castiel and Hannah stop. It's called Little Levi's, and it's a shout out to Jensen Ackles' nephew. And so there's like the sign that from the gas station apparently got like sent to Levi's bedroom, like to Levi's parents' house, and is now like up on the wall in Levi's bedroom.
And is Levi the nephew that has Down syndrome? Because I know Jensen is very involved with Down syndrome charities.
I'm not sure, but I think that's it's possible.
Mm-hmm. I know he does a lot with Down syndrome charities, and I've seen pictures of him with his nephew, but I don't remember the nephew's name.
Yeah,
that's cool. I love finding these little pieces of trivia. They go back to St. Louis. They go back to St. Louis, which takes balls because they left under a cloud.
Well, St. Louis is where the chapter house is.
Yes,
and
that's important because they didn't realize there were any other Men of Letters locations.
And I want to know that they took everything out of that location after they got rid of the Albertor and brought it back to the bunker. I mean, I need that.
Right.
But apparently St. Louis is where the house was for the movie The Exorcist. And that was supposedly shot there.
Because there's also the Exorcist steps in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. And there's, or it was said to be there. And there, it also has a place called Zombie Road, which had a loner guy who was thought to be a serial killer who, surveilled this rural road and people disappeared there. And so, yeah, Zombie Road. So it sounds like something up the Winchesters alley. Right. Yeah. Did we leave anything out? I'm excited with all the cool stuff that we've found out, especially about Tulsa.
Yeah, I don't think we left very much out. I mean, we go back to one of Bobby's old hunting cabins in the Book of the Damned episode that's like around Des Moines.
Did we mention hell?
We did not actually mention
hell. I should point out that there is action in hell.
And not Hell, Michigan, Hell.
Yeah,
Hell,
you know,
hell.
AP double hockey
the
stick.
hell, the one that doesn't actually exist, but that, you know, there are people and places that go there and chat about it and hang out there.
And it gets a makeover from time to time, like when Rowena took over and started receptions.
Yeah. We spend a bit of time in heaven as well, right? So we get to see heaven's prison, and then we also get back to purgatory in a flashback that Dean has with Benny. So it's the trifecta of all of the
Fun
sort
places.
of like afterlife places.
Finding out that heaven has a jail is sort of like when you find out that Disney World has a jail. There is Disney jail, and you can go there if you are not well behaved.
Yes.
And it isn't as much fun as Disneyland.
It is not the happiest place on earth. No. I know somebody who actually ended up there in their wayward youth because he and some Marine buddies were standing in line to get in one of the clubs at what was then Pleasure Island, and somebody behind them made a snarky remark about the Marines, and well, you know, you have to defend your honor, and there went Disney jail. So
don't make a snarky remark.
Never make a snarky remark to a bunch of guys with high and tight haircuts. It's just not going to end well.
Well, for you, it's going to be fine for them.
I was looking at my list. Oh, Pendleton, Oregon. One interesting thing there is apparently an underground city in Pendleton, Oregon, that is full of tunnels that at one point had a number of illicit businesses running out of them. And so it was kind of a subterranean city to the city itself. And I guess all that's been shut down now, except for a few things for tourist purposes. But it was at some point a thriving, truly, literally underground economy. Which I just thought was sort of interesting. You hear about that stuff happening in some of the older European cities where like they had to rebuild the city after a fire or flood. And so there was layers underneath, but you don't hear it so much in American cities. So I thought that was kind of cool.
There's a small underground section in Port Townsend, Washington, with like a couple of shops. And I think it used to be a little bit more like during Prohibition. I think it was sort of a smuggling kind of thing, because there's a huge history of smuggling in Port Townsend, Washington. It was like it served briefly as the customs house and sort of like the gateway to the West in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so there was a lot of crime. It also has it's sort of multi-layered. There's like a waterfront downtown section, and then there's like bluffs, and then on the top of the bluffs is like the upper class uptown part of town. And so yeah, downtown is where this section has some underground things, which is
cool.
Sort of interesting to think that downtown Port Townsend needed further underground places because it was already pretty seedy as it was.
So we need to set up a tour for all this stuff.
We do.
Clearly.
You know how many miles?
She's well organized.
That's right. Do you know how many miles we would put on anything? We'd be in a bus just by the time you drive from Oregon all the way to Massachusetts and then back to Kansas and then to Connecticut. I mean, we need lots of miles.
We need not day jobs as well.
That's right. That's right. Well, we'll all just ride on the bus.
Right?
Clearly.
We'll all just ride on the bus. So, well, folks, we have run through our time. It's always so much fun. Thank you so much. Before we go, please tell everybody where we can find you online, starting with Elektra.
Elektra Hammond. You can find everything you want to know at untilmidnight.com.
Very good. Anna.
You can find me at annakensing.com and on TikTok at annakensing.books.
Very nice. And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. All the social media is a variation of those. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, and I write for the Winchester Family Business blog, but most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for being with us. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.